Hi, and welcome to another episode of Starship Gaming. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. Now, let's jump right into today's episode. Now, this was something that I never really thought much about until recently, but Windows Millennium Edition, as it's called, actually had a pretty huge impact on my life, more than I thought. So today, I'm going to more or less share a story, or I should say, a retrospective, of my experience of Windows Millennium Edition. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. So, like all humble beginnings, it started with a yard sale. Yes, a yard sale. It was May 2005, and me and my dad, or I should say my dad and I, get a little corrective there, we had just dropped my mother off to her job. She was a caretaker to an elderly woman, and we were just driving back and we saw a yard sale, and I'm like, I want to stop and see if they have any Star Wars toys. This was when I was obsessed. Star Wars was my life. It still is my life today. Star Wars is, ironically, 15 years later. I was still on the high from just seeing Revenge of the Sith in the theaters, which was, you don't truly experience Revenge of the Sith until you saw it in theaters. So I got out, walked around this yard sale, and here is this desktop computer. Tower, chunky monitor, a chunky boy, if you want to call it that. All the hookups, everything. Had one piece of software with it, which was Roller Coaster Tycoon. Had no clue if it worked. Convinced my dad somehow to dish out $125 for this thing, and it ended up going home, and originally had Windows 98 SE on it. So the majority of the summer, I'm sitting there, playing mostly Roller Coaster Tycoon, but also playing Star Wars Pod Racer, which is another one of my favorite PC games to play, still is to this day. And of course, Flight Simulator 98, which is another one. I still own that to this day. I still occasionally play it just for, just out of boredom. And then one fateful November, my cousin comes to visit for a week. And within 2 or 3 days, he manages to crash that computer. I don't know how. I don't remember how it happened. Anyway, my dad is frantically looking around to find a computer shop that can fix it. Every computer shop around wants automatically $200-300 just to reload Windows 98, the operating system, into it. This was back when computers were still a pretty big deal. But every computer shop around in this area, there weren't very many. Where I live in my state, there, at the time, wasn't a whole lot of computer repair places. There were only 2 in my entire county. After my cousin leaves, we're there with a computer that doesn't work. And then 3 days after my cousin leaves, my dad wanders into a Christian thrift store. Now, this thrift store in particular was somewhere that he frequented for computer parts and just general, electronics in general. And he happened to talk to one of the people who worked in this particular Christian thrift store's electronics department, repairing their electronics. And he come to find out it was 2 people. One was deaf and one was blind. I kid you not. So the next day, he brings my computer this broken computer, to this guy who is deaf and blind. Well, I should say these two guys who are deaf and blind. And they managed to put an operating system into it. Technically, it wasn't broken. It's just the operating system crashed. There was no restoring it. Anyway, he brings it to them, and they're like, well, we don't have Windows 98 on hand. We don't have XP either. But we do have Windows Millennium Edition. So they end up putting Windows Millennium Edition in it. That evening when I get home from school, I was in middle school at the time, my dad brings it home, he sets it up, he brings me in, he's like, son, I fixed your computer. And I'm like, wow. And that was it. Just wow. So anyway, he also picked up a few, some software, word processing programs and whatnot from this thrift store. And, I set it up and I used it, and it was basically the operating system I used until 2008. Well, actually, if you want to be technical, the day after Christmas 2007, I started using Windows Vista that Christmas, the day after Christmas. My dad dished out like $1,400 for a brand new compact PC, which I still own to this day, but it no longer has Vista in it. It has, I believe, Linux Mint, but I don't use it very often, maybe a couple times a year. So anyway, November 2005, got it fixed, got Windows Millennium Edition on it, and this was the computer that I used, like I said, for, a few years, and it actually had a pretty big impact on my life. It was one of the first PCs that I learned how to edit video on, Windows Movie Maker, which, came with Windows Millennium Edition. I learned how to edit video on that. I learned how to edit music and, all that. It was it was a really good experience. I never had any problems out of Millennium Edition, and eventually it ended up being gifted. I guess you could say it was gifted. Gifted to my cousin, who continued to use it for 5 more years after that. In the spring, I gave it to him in the spring of 2008. I know a lot of people hated Millennium Edition. Of course it was buggy. It had its little things. But to me, it's a memory. I had absolutely no problems with it. None that I noticed. And, it's just a really good, warm memory to me, using this operating system. So, tell me in the comments down below, did you use Windows Millennium Edition? Do you still have a computer that you use that has Windows Millennium Edition on it, just for, gaming, or, well, really, gaming's the only thing you can still do on them? Let me know in the comments down below. I think that would be interesting to find out if anybody out there still owns one. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. And until next time, I will see ya.